I know JD Vance is on his book tour, but I'm not entirely sure that he doesn't just have a humiliation fetish.
Trump can't run again, and he'd be a little too exciting for me anyway. So it's either going to be you or Rubio. Here's my deal breaker for your side. Okay. Under Trump, you guys have two outcomes that an election can be. Either we win or they cheated. That shit has to stop. And the person who... And that means the person who has to stop it would be you or Marco. Can you tell me you will do that? Will you bring us back to the middle, at least on that, where we concede elections, where it's not either one of those two options?
Okay, Bill, so this is where I'm probably going to lose you here, but here's...
That happened about 8 minutes ago.
Look, I don't think that we should not concede elections, but I don't think that's what's going on. I think that if you go back to the president's core argument, he was making an argument about problems that existed in 2020. And here's the problem that I'm most focused on. The president and I have talked a lot about this, and I think we share a perspective here, but set to the side the stuff that really gets you and your audience very angry about whether the count was legitimate in Georgia or Pennsylvania or any of these other states. Is it true that large technology companies, some of whom have financial interests that exist outside the United States of America, were they censoring information in the run-up to an election? And set to the side the stuff, again, the Georgia stuff, but
that was litigated. Dominion, the Fox News paid us.
I'm trying to make the more middle ground argument here. The biggest criticism I had of the 2020 election is that you had technology companies that were quite literally censoring negative information about the left and promoting negative information about the right. So in a fundamental sense, like if the First Amendment says that we have a free and open debate and then the American people judge based on that free and open debate, the sense in which I think the election in 2020 was rigged, I'm sorry, is that you had technology companies that were putting their thumb on the scale in a way that completely obliterated the real open exchange of ideas. Now, by the way, it didn't happen in 2024, but it happened in 2020 and it was a problem.
Well, you're going to get a big pat on the back when you go back to the White House. All right.
Bill Maher says under Trump, it's either we win or they cheated. That shit has to stop. And of course, Vance doesn't agree and instead devolves into this weird tangent about tech companies censoring information in 2020. So let's talk about that. The story Vance is referencing, the Hunter Biden laptop story, did not flip the 2020 election results. Full stop. And anybody who's trying to convince you otherwise is a complete fool. Here's what happened. Twitter blocked users from sharing the New York Post's Hunter Biden laptop story in October of 2020. Twitter executives have since acknowledged that that was done in error. Fine, that is a legitimate critique. But here's what Vance and every Republican out there conveniently leaves out of that story. Why were tech companies doing heightened content moderation in October 2020 in the first place? Because in the months and years before that, Republicans have spent every waking hour screaming that the 2020 election was about to be stolen, before a single vote had been cast. They spent years flooding social media with disinformation about voting machines, mail ballots, and dead voters. Election deniers basically deployed 4 core false narratives: conspiracy theories depicting voting machines as vehicles for widespread fraud, false claims that mail voting and drop boxes were insecure, baseless accusations of votes being cast by non-citizens or dead people, and false claims of fraud in vote counting. They built the entire ecosystem of disinformation, and then they act shocked that platforms started over-moderating in response to that. You don't get to light the house on fire and then complain that firefighters got some water on the furniture. And more importantly, and I cannot stress this enough, one of the indefensible assertions that keeps reemerging is that social media companies' efforts to limit sharing of the New York Post story cost Donald Trump the 2020 election. There is simply zero credible evidence that this is true. Biden won by over 7 million votes in the popular vote and flipped multiple states. The idea that suppressing a story on Twitter for a couple of days, a story that was still being covered on Fox News, Breitbart, the New York Post itself, and every right-wing media outlet in America, somehow cost Trump the election, is not a serious argument. It is cope. It is a fairy tale that Republicans tell themselves so that they never have to reckon with the fact that Trump was just a bad candidate who lost the election. Just a quick note here to say that if you appreciate my work, which is and always will be 100% free, a small ask is if you could please pre-order my new book, The Day After, which explores how Democrats must finally wield power if they're fortunate enough to get it back. I'll also be on tour in DC, New York, and LA mid-July. You can grab tickets to the tour and you can pre-order the book at the same link, which I'll put on the screen and in the post description of this video. You can also find them at briantylercohen.com/book. Again, I'll never paywall a single piece of content, but this is the one time that I'll ask for some support for a book that I really think meets this moment. Thanks so much. But let's follow Vance's logic here, that the purported corruption of the president's son was potent enough to flip an election, and that's why the evil communist Marxist Democrats had to suppress that story. I'd love to know, if Hunter Biden's foreign business dealings were so catastrophic that they constituted election interference, then what do we call what the Trump family has done and is doing right now, which was orders of magnitude worse and continues to be orders of magnitude worse? Like, let's start with Ivanka. In 2017, her business won preliminary approval for 3 Chinese trademarks on the same day that she dined with President Xi at Mar-a-Lago. In 2018, the same week Trump announced that he would try to save jobs at ZTE, the Chinese telecommunications giant, Ivanka's business was awarded registration approval from the Chinese government for 5 trademark applications. A month later, her business got registration approval for 3 more Chinese trademarks on the same day that her dad announced that he would lift sanctions against ZTE. In all, at least 28 foreign trademarks were approved for Ivanka Trump while she was working in the White House. No smoke for Ivanka by J.D. Vance, though, huh? Then there's Jared Kushner. Kushner formed an investment firm right after Trump left office, and 6 months later, the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Saudi Arabia, controlled by the Crown Prince, invested $2 billion. $2 billion. And here's the part that should make your jaw drop. A panel that screens investments for the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund expressed concerns about Kushner's new private equity firm, citing issues like the firm's inexperience and unsatisfactory due diligence on the firm's operations. Saudi Arabia's own advisors said this was a bad deal, and the Crown Prince overruled them anyway and sent $2 billion to the guy who had just spent 4 years shaping U.S. foreign policy toward Saudi Arabia. As Republican Chris Christie put it, and I don't often quote Chris Christie, this grift from the family is breathtaking. Or how about Don Jr.? When the Pentagon announced a $620 million loan to a small North Carolina startup linked to Don Jr., ProPublica found that the request was made by Peter Navarro, a White House advisor and close friend of Trump Jr.'s, and of the dozens of companies under consideration at the time, Vulcans, that was the company, was the only deal initiated by a top aide to the president, with Pentagon staff being told to work late nights and push it through in a matter of weeks because, and I quote, the call came from the White House, we have to get this done. So again, if Vance thinks that corruption from the president's kid is bad enough to render a candidate disqualifying, then why is there not a single word when the corruption is coming from his own side and is, again, orders of magnitude worse than what Hunter Biden did? And the reason is, Vance is not actually offering a good faith excuse. He is lying to cover for the fact that he will never rule out crying rigged elections because that is the entire Republican playbook and it always will be. Election denial is not an accident or an aberration in today's GOP. It is the strategy. It is the principal tool they deploy every time they lose, and they have zero intention of giving it up. Look at the evidence. Nearly 300 election deniers ran for state and congressional offices in 2022. Governorships, secretaries of state, attorneys general, positions specifically chosen because they have direct influence over how elections are certified and administered. And when those candidates lost, many election deniers cried fraud, win or lose. Carrie Lake warned that if we don't win, there's some cheating going on before her primary. And then when she won, she accepted the result without a word about the rigged system that she had been screaming about for months. Do you see the pattern? The system is rigged when they lose. The system is fine when they win. That is not a principled position. That is a scam. And note what Vance specifically said. 2020 was rigged, but not 2024. Why not 2024? I don't know. Let's think for a second. Were tech companies not moderating content in 2024? Of course they were. Was social media not influential in 2024? Obviously it was. The difference between 2020 and 2024 is that Republicans won in 2024 while they lost in 2020. That's it. That's the entire basis of J.D. Vance's theory of election integrity. We won, therefore it was fair. We lost, therefore it was rigged. That is the intellectual framework of a sore loser, not a statesman. And that's why Bill Maher's question was so important and Vance's non-answer was so revealing. Because what Maher was really asking is, can your party be trusted to participate in democracy, a functioning democracy? And what Vance was really saying is, only if we win. Which means the answer is no. They cannot be trusted. They will not concede. They will not accept results. They will not stop, because the threat of crying rigged is one of the most powerful tools they have. It suppresses voter confidence, it fires up the base, it raises money, and it gives them a pretext to challenge results in court or out of court. Why would they ever voluntarily give that up? Bill Maher wanted a simple answer, and he didn't get one. But the non-answer told us everything we needed to know. Before you go, I'm very excited to announce that I've written a new book titled The Day After: How to Wield Power in a Post-Trump World. The book explores what is, in my opinion, the single most important theme that we're dealing with in politics today and moving forward: power. Specifically, how Republicans abuse it and how Democrats refuse to wield it. This book explains how we got here and, more importantly, how we should finally wield power if we're fortunate enough to get it back. It is the blueprint for progressives who want to do far more than just restore the status quo. Please pre-order today by visiting the link in the episode description or go to briantylercohen.com/book. You can grab yours from any of the major retailers like Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or find an independent bookstore closest to you that's also listed on that website. Thanks so much for supporting independent media.